Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Agile Development Book Club. I am James Shore, and today we are discussing investing in agility, which is one of my favorite topics. But first, I have some exciting news. The physical copy of the book is shipping. I have it right here in my hot little hands. Um, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So I am going to be giving away a copy of this book next time. I've been giving away a copy of the book every week, and next time I'm going to go give away a copy of the physical book rather than the ebook. So be sure to just participate in the Discord over the next week to be entered into that drawing. Um, so as I said, today is the topic of the discussion is investing in agility. I think this is one of the most important topics in the book because in order to really succeed with Agile, you have to have the organizational investments. But rather than me just talking about it off the cuff, let me read the introduction to that chapter from the book. So, chapter 4, invest in agility. As we saw in the previous chapter, for your teams to get the benefits of Agile, your organization has to buy into the underlying Agile philosophy. Not just spending money, that's comparatively easy, but making real, meaningful changes to organizational structures, systems, and behaviors. If that sounds like a lot of work, well, that's because it is. Are these investments really so important? Yes. Yes, they really are. Investing in Agile is important because you're investing in changing your constraints. Most of what holds teams back isn't the processes they use, it's the constraints they're under. Make the investments and ignore the practices, and your teams are still likely to improve. Perform the practices and ignore the investments? They'll struggle. As Martin Fowler said, I see a startling parallel between DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen, the creator of Ruby on Rails, and Kent Beck, creator of Extreme Programming. For either of them, if you present them with a constrained world, they'll look at constraints we take for granted, consider them to be unessential, and create a world without them. They just stick some intellectual dynamite under them and move on. That's why they can create things like Extreme Programming and Rails, which really give the industry a jolt. Martin Fowler. So make the investments. They're the secret to Agile success. First question, how have you seen organizations invest in their agility and how did it turn out? On the Discord, just to get the conversation started, Anthony Williams said, the most visible investments in Agile are often things like hiring an Agile coach or investing in infrastructure like CI servers. Though these might have significant monetary costs and are undoubtedly valuable, without support for a more agile way of doing things, such as reduced pressure to commit to deadlines and deliverables month in advance, they do little to actually move the needle. So I would certainly agree that without having reduced pressure to commit to deadlines and so forth, you don't see as much changes. I do see that people are making investments in sort of what I call the delivering zone of practices like CI. What are your experiences? Do you feel that that doesn't move the needle on its own, or does that make a difference? Jay Bazuzzi, who I see is on the call, so Jay, I'd love to hear you sort of chime in on this. Jay Bazuzzi wrote, I've seen my organization send developers to TDD classes, and then the developers start writing unit-style tests, but they can't figure out how to retrofit good unit tests when modifying existing code. Other than adding testing hooks, they don't change how they organize the code. And even in new code, they often write the tests after writing the code. Fourth, the tests are slow and unreliable and hard to diagnose. Not everything gets tested. I think we're not actually giving developers the skill they need. And of course, skills are only one small part of behavior change. So Jay, are you interested in joining us and saying a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm hoping that the story that I told resonates with a lot of people, that they've seen teams go through this experience of we took TDD classes, we think we're in TDD mode, but we don't quite know how to do it here. We're not getting quite the results that we were promised. Um, I, I think part of what this comes down to is we're not actually teaching the right skill. That TDD, as we usually describe it, says either I have no code, I'm starting greenfield, here's how I grow, or I start with clean code that is already well organized and I want to extend it. And it doesn't, as described, tell us what to do when we start with code that is a mess, legacy code that is really gnarly and tightly coupled and otherwise difficult to work in. And I think there's another set of skills that we're missing. I don't quite have a name for it. Sometimes I call it TDD's legacy cousin, that tells us how to start in that place and make our path to a place where we can do TDD as described. So there's the investment part of this, though, that's missing is giving our development team space to go and do the work to take our gnarly code and make it into something where TDD is possible, where we can start accelerating our development, improving our quality. Like, to get there, if we're starting in a gnarly code base, we really have a long way to go, and making space for that is really important. It's not just a matter of telling developers, go do this. We need to tell them we understand that this is going to change how our development is going to go over the next maybe months or years, whatever your time frame is, and really giving them the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thank you. So you're really agreeing with Anthony Williams, who said that investing in these technical practices don't do a lot to move the needle without a corresponding investment in sort of the underlying philosophy of, hey, we're giving you space to learn and so forth. Thanks, Jay. Sarah, welcome.
I was just going to respond to Jay's comment on that with TDD and the examples that he's giving. I've seen the same. And I think that comes back, at least in my experience, it comes back to the buy-in as well. Like the developers are, it's not that bought in like they don't want to be, but there's sometimes like there's not an understanding of the real benefit in a way that is like able to kind of power through. TDD can be really hard at first. Like it's a shift to your work, to the way you work, and so it can feel like you're making my job harder, you know. And so like that, you really have to be bought into like the horizon that's out there of okay, well, once we get past this, you're going to see. It's so much easier. So I think that's just, again, comes back to that same buy-in, which was one of the kind of the themes, I think, in throughout the chapter, of everything, even down to something like TDD.
Yeah, and to sort of play off of what Jay was saying about legacy code, I do agree with Jay that learning how to do TDD with existing code is a lot harder, and that makes that initial leap even harder still. I'm working with a company right now. They're just now going through a major change. We're actually introducing FAST there, and it's been super interesting. FAST is Ron Cortell's fluid scaling technology. And we're not introducing new technical practices, but even that, just the change, it's really hard at first. It's a big mindset shift for folks. In their case, moving from individual work to team-based work, and then on top of that, FAST's dynamic team selection. I don't think I could introduce TDD to these folks at the same time because they're already kind of overwhelmed by just sort of the basics of the change. Sarah, thank you very much for your comments. Anthony, welcome.
Hi. So I just wanted to follow on with Jay and Sarah's comments about TDD, and feel like, yes, that's something particularly that I've seen many developers struggle with. Because they understand TDD as writing lots of unit tests, and that's quite different from a true test first approach. And they don't necessarily get that immediately and without explicit training. And so certainly if management don't understand the difference, then they're not going to invest in actually training developers into TDD. And if the developers don't understand the difference, then particularly in legacy code, then that can be a big difficulty, a big stumbling block in terms of actually moving forwards with adopting agile processes. Now I know that with lots of people that I've worked with, then it takes a while of writing lots of so-called TDD tests, and then eventually they say, oh, hang on a minute, no, if I change the way that I'm structuring my code, then I can get the advantages, and that it takes time to get there.
Yeah.
requires investment from the organization to support that.
It's a tough question. Drew, welcome.
Hey, good morning. This is a really, really tough question. I have come to realize that I think the most fundamental concept to me that I think is most impactful for Agile is the mindset of thinking small and developing a culture around thinking small. Because I think so many of how you approach your code, how you approach your product, how you approach your customers is fundamentally changed by your ability to think small about things. And so many of the practices I see people struggling with when they fail to be able to reduce things down to a smaller scope. So I think thinking of this off the fly, that's probably where I think I would try to start, is how to coach people into thinking small. It's a really tough question. I do think learning how to slice your delivery into smaller increments is probably the most fundamental. I think the other things like code start to follow that if you're doing your delivery in those increments. So probably that. And I think this comes back a little bit. Part of what was maybe on my mind was the unit test conversation, right? Because even how you build out tests, if you look at how do I create code coverage for my entire legacy code base, that's an overwhelming thought. But if I think about how can I add one test in one area to, improve the one thing I'm working on, that starts to become achievable. So I think when you think small about those work increments, I think it affects how you think about all those other things.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you, Drew. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. Hi. I want to go in another direction. So first of all, 10 years ago, I've been working with Agile for 20 years ago. 10 years ago, my answer would be completely different. Today, I want to say, I want to invest in the managerial layers or in the leadership roles, not only people managers, those roles, because we realize again and again and again, we see the problem are not with the teams. They can even study Agile, Scrum, whatever we call it, from the books, and they can get really, really, they can quickly learn to do it. But our leaders, they can just like that make that not happen. So nowadays, if I have a choice, and if I can only invest in one thing, I will invest in the layers or in the leadership. Let me call it that, in the leadership architects, whoever have people that follow them, just black and white, speaking black and white.
Yeah, that's another really good one. If I had to choose just one thing, which I've never, of course, that's a very artificial constraint. Would I choose leaders? I don't know. I might choose the opposite, and that's maybe because this is what I saw succeed in the early days of XP. I might choose the natural leaders in the organization, the grassroots leaders, because they have influence over the sort of official leaders, the HR style leaders. But what I see myself is that when you're making a change, it's got to come from both ends. You've got to have some grassroots leadership, and you have to have some top-down leadership. And missing both makes it really, really hard, in my opinion.
But one of my arguments is that leaders, and also the kind of leaders that you talk about, they are not that much inclined to reading and learning and self-studying about Agile as the lower levels, the hands-on people. They will very quickly grasp it. So that's why I would like to give them a hand.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I know that at least for the first edition of my book, it was this grassroots people who were handing a copy to those leaders, who didn't always read it, but instead turned around and called me, which, from my perspective, is also a fine answer. Thank you, Lisa. Jay.
Yeah, I was thinking about how the investment of changing how we evaluate and reward employees. In a lot of organizations, between the HR department and the management structure, there's this model where we evaluate each person individually, and that creates an incentive that makes it harder to do some of the things we're talking about in Agile. Just to pick one example, if we want to work well as an ensemble, part of what I need to do is, if a problem comes up where I know the answer and it's a great answer and I can jump right in and offer it, but maybe letting somebody else try to solve the problem will help them grow, or contribute a voice that we haven't heard. Something I should do is hold back and give them a space to do that. But that behavior means that I don't have as much to brag about when my review time comes. And so it creates this conflict between making the team successful and making myself successful, and the team's success is what matters more for the business. So something I would love to see more of, and I've always struggled with around Agile, is both in HR and in my chain of management, finding a way to evaluate whole team success instead of individual success. I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, and these I certainly would agree with that. And these HR changes are not necessarily easy for anybody to make, because they sort of tie back into the fundamental structure of the organization. Thanks very much, Jay. Drew, I'm going to let you have the last word on this topic and then move on to the next prompt. So welcome back.
I just wanted to make one comment with the HR thing, because I've run into that several times. And, we've managed to find some creative ways around that a few times by still saying, okay, managers are required to create individual goals for people, but that doesn't mean we can't sit down as a team and decide on our collective goals and then just document those in every individual's record, right? Or, we can still have peer reviews of people and have completely open and direct conversations, but yet still note that in an individual HR record. We can still do team-based bonuses, even though it's just bonusing every individual through the structure. So we found ways to kind of do that even without changing the HR systems.
Yeah, it's sort of like the old trick that I've played with certifications such as ISO 9001, which it turns out they don't actually care what you do as long as you do what you said you were going to do. So you can get away with quite a bit by just saying our process is to work as a team, and we're going to award individuals for working as a team, and that can get around a lot of the bureaucracy. Thanks very much, Drew. I said you were going to have the last word, but Sarah's raised her hand, and I'd like to give her a chance to speak. So, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I think one thing that's helpful that I try to get teams to do is to share. Everybody does have individual goals, and to share those goals with the team. If you can get a team if you can build like a team dynamic that is really supportive of other members of your team, then that really helps in terms of like, oh, well, I'm working, we're working collectively on this, but I understand that some of your individual goals are growing in this particular area. Let's see if we can help you, work a little bit more on that part of the code base, let's say. And I found that to be a good way to kind of help build up like a team dynamic too, that does also help individuals, to continue to achieve their own goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Sarah. Our third prompt is an invitation to tell a story. So tell a story about an organization that failed to appropriately invest in agility. And what did you see happen? And Thomas Owens, who's on the call, and maybe he'll want to chime in on this. Thomas Owens said, it's anticlimactic, but not much. There was still a culture of improvement, but it was minor improvements to an otherwise plan-driven organization. Work did get better, but there were still inherent problems with trying to build software against big plans developed early. The improvements were very small and overall not transformative. Sarah Horn Van Tries, Sarah, who's just been talking with us, also commented. Do you want to just speak to this yourself, Sarah, or should I read out what you wrote on the Discord?
I can speak to it. Sure. I shared two examples on the Discord. One that I feel like probably falls more into which was your next prompt about a success story, and one that or one that I've seen a few times that would be not so much. So I found that investing in the delivering zone and really starting there and hoping to get lift elsewhere has been less effective. So there's still a lot of benefits that come. I think somebody later had made some comments about some improving build times, and there's really positive outcomes that can come from investments in those kind of technical delivery practices. But it can't get you, at least in my experience, it doesn't get you to Agile. It doesn't get you to like the benefits that you're outlining kind of in that chapter. So like that troubleshooting section of your chapter where you have if your team is doing this, like I've seen, there's one section about release and operations and stability. That's kind of the area. If you focus just in the delivering zone, that area can improve, but there's all these other things that really start with that focusing zone. And my experience when starting there was very positive ultimately. And like that's the team that I worked with where that's kind of where we had started. It took a bit to get us there, but that was certainly the most agile. And if I were to read through that troubleshooting, like we didn't have any of those kind of issues ultimately by the time that we got there. So
nice. Thank you. Amitai, welcome.
Thank you. Hi. a story from my personal experience before I became a coach. It's the story that led me down the coaching path. We were doing Agile in a really small team. It was very XP inspired. We went pretty far with limited management support, to the point where what we were up against, and I as the team's leader was mostly up against the most, was this cognitive dissonance between middle managers being happy to be responsible for our results because they were always good and we never got anybody in trouble and we were very reliable, and being unhappy when they were forced to learn the details of how we produced those results. Drove me crazy. Like, they suddenly didn't like the results as much when I explained what we needed to keep it up.
You know, you're not the only one having that experience. I actually have a story in the book about a real team in Utah that I'm aware of, where they had the same thing, that the team was very reliable, but management, when they looked in and saw how that reliability was being created, it made them uncomfortable. And that team, that XP team, ended up being disbanded. And I think, I don't know if they were absorbed in the rest of the organization, but I know that the person I was talking to ended up leaving the company as a result.
So that's the end of the story for us. We did it because we needed to be that way. And we took all the stress of that values mismatch into ourselves. And then we burned out and left.
Yeah, that was a really familiar story. I remember hearing a lot of experience reports, particularly in the early days of XP, about, hey, we love this. We did it as a grassroots thing, and we had to put somebody in to be a buffer between us and the organization. And then they burned out, and then they stopped buffering, and the whole thing fell apart, which sort of comes back to, I think Lisa was saying, investing in the management, that sort of the top-down management's understanding of what Agile is.
That was exactly why I came with that comment. Exactly. Thank you for those stories.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Amitai. And by the way, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And Afzal, am I pronouncing your name right?
Yep.
All right. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. The experience I want to share was basically Scrum was pushed on some of the teams as they were brought into a particular organization or department as part of a reorganization that happened within. So the department already had a few Scrum teams that were following Scrum, and they were reasonably successful because they were developing new product. There was no legacy code involved. And the teams that were brought into were mostly working on the legacy code, like 10, 15 years old. And part of it is mainframe, old batch jobs and that tech stack. So these teams were brought in just because the department was following Scrum. All the teams were, given this, one size fits all approach, and they were all kind of pushed towards following Scrum, and there was zero buy-in, and they were not given proper training, even in any sort of Agile foundations or why we are doing it differently, how we should do differently. No investment in your terms, James, right? And it's been more than a year. The tech leads and dev managers, they still are very skeptical about Agile. Nothing else changed except that it is now sprinting, right? So they don't see value in any of the Scrum events. The features are still, takes a month long or even more. There is no iterative approach to it. So going back to Drew's comment, they still don't understand, thinking in terms of small iterations. So,
unfortunately, I think the story you've just told is a really, really common one. It's certainly one that I've seen over and over again. I call it, slapping the Agile sticker on the door and then walking away, right? Because all you do is you change the names, you put in some ceremonies, and then that's it. I know of a company that did that with Safe. They put in Safe, didn't change a lot about the organization other than that. Had some grassroots introduction of XP and pair programming. I have a friend who works at this company. It's a large, well-known company, and eventually it it flames out. People get tired of the struggle. And in this particular company, they've decided to stop doing software development entirely, and they're moving to an outsource model. So they're just going to, well, not an offshore model. They're just going to move all their development out to other countries and have the people who are engineers now manage those folks. But of course, I'm hearing about this because my friend didn't become a programmer to manage other programmers. So it's a tough situation. Thanks very much, Afzal. Our fourth and final prompt, and feel free to come back to the previous ones too. When it's at its best, what does investing in agility look like? Tell a real world story or share your opinion. So we've talked about, real world stories of when it doesn't work. Do you have any stories of when it worked really, really well? Or if you don't, do you have an imagination of what it would look like if it worked really, really well? Love to hear your thoughts on this. Tony Vo wrote on the Discord, said that, well, basically he's not sure, but basically most or all of the time I started at the bottom of the hierarchy. So I typically focus and pick up on things that I could control and requires less changes from other people and teams for some reasons. It's an easy sell to teams and management to make investment on developer happiness and productivity, such as changing build time. For the couple previous places I've been to, the build time is long, over hours, and apparently management is very interested in reducing the build time, and they invested in reducing Jenkins build time to less than 10 minutes for the current place I'm at. Besides investment in breaking down stories, acceptance criteria, and many other things. I think in turn, I'm skipping a little bit of what he said. I think it in turn improves developer happiness daily and improves the amount of PRs for over 70 teams. So I'm condensing that a little bit, but basically saying what he's seen work well is focusing on the build times, focusing on developer happiness, which I think is sort of what some of the early conversation was around as well. I don't know if you were saying that, Jay. I'm not saying that that's the only thing you were suggesting, but I do see some folks start out more with the how can we make individual developers' lives easier. And I think when you're working from a grassroots perspective, that can make a lot of sense in terms of creating that groundswell of support that can, in turn, maybe lead to some top-down change as well and investments. Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? Or your thoughts in general?
So I have seen Agile work really well. I think that the story I had shared before, it actually did start with Scrum, which was not what made it work really well. But the organization had invested in some of the things. I think that the real investments were not Scrum. It's just that was kind of, I think, what the organization thought it was investing in. But what was ended up to me being the source of success was that such an investment in the team itself, in building up that like a really solid team dynamic, and in making sure the team had a really solid understanding of purpose and context. And so it was so sick to me that we were producing results and we were all happy to work together, and it was such a positive experience once we got through some of the some of the hurdles that it is then as I've grown into leadership roles, I've tried to say, okay, well, what can I do to get us, like what was the piece there to focus on? So I've been trying to focus on, again, the team is obviously a really important piece of it, making sure you kind of build a strong team dynamic, but also making sure everybody kind of understands the why behind what they're doing. So that was everybody felt really proud of what it was that we were working toward. Everybody felt like this is I understand what this value of what I'm doing is. And I understand it, what it is I need to do, but also why we're doing it. And I found that I feel like sometimes that gets missed. So I just asked one of the teams I'm working with a couple of days ago, do you guys know why the company decided to prioritize this over other great ideas, and nobody did. So, and I feel like, okay, let's take a minute, let's solve that problem, because I feel like that kind of puts energy behind some of the things. And that energy, when a team is working like really, really well and working on small iterations and working and has that, I mean, it's just such a difference.
Yeah. I would agree with that. The company I'm working with now, we started with purpose and context, and it was just so great to see how that changed people's understanding of what was important, but also how it caused the people who were leading that conversation about purpose and context, how it forced them to sort of confront some fundamental stuff that they hadn't really thought about before. It was a really hard exercise for them. It took a long time to get through this because there was a whole lot of, it led to, well, it started out, I was brought in originally just to do training on planning. And I said, well, let's start with purpose and context. And we got into that, and they realized, well, we don't have the right teams because our teams don't align with what it doesn't make sense to talk about context for a team because these teams aren't really working together on the thing that is important. And that's how it turned into this whole change work that I'm doing and ended up with FAST, or is ending up with FAST. May not stick with FAST. We'll see what happens. But, and that all came from that purpose and context discussion, which forced all this very rich sort of introspection about what's important to the organization. Thanks very much, Sarah. Tony, welcome. And this is Tony Vo, who I was reading from earlier.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so I should mention one thing I think I should add to that comments earlier, and also regarding to what Sarah mentioned is I'm lucky in the sense where my company, they already spent a lot of effort in building up that team self-organizing, that team dynamic, so that when I came in, I don't have to worry much about the mindset or the leadership management because they have already done a lot of that work already. So, but then I guess the key thing, at least for me, because mainly I most of the time I start up from the bottom of the hierarchy, is that we need to find the thing that we can contribute value incrementally, and we see some real benefit from it, so that we can get more buy-in for the future's improvement or the future ideas. So that is one thing. Yeah, and I guess for me, because most of the time I'm starting up from the bottom, so I keep learning up a way so that I can, I guess, learn more how I can influence or changing kind of like the management side or the agile management, because that is an area where I think I don't understand much or I don't have much of an experience. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That grassroots sort of bottom up change is how I got my start. And it's both an incredible learning journey and can be incredibly frustrating because you have so little control. And after you've had a certain amount of experience, you see, oh, well, things could be so much better, but I don't know how to make that happen. And that's actually why I ended up being a consultant, because when I first started with XP, I had this great experience with an XP team supported by what I knew then, but now really know was a fantastic manager. And so she let us do XP, to the fullest. But this was back in 2000. And after that, I was spoiled to work any other way. And so I wanted to teach people how to do this. And I started out just doing it as, I was a contractor. I came in and I just did contract programming work. And I couldn't stand to work another way. So I started trying to do this grassroots thing, and then ultimately became a consultant because I was spending all my time teaching people how to do this. And I figured, well, that's how I'm going to get how to do what I love. Turns out as a consultant, you spend a lot of time teaching and not as much time doing what you love, in that, at least in terms of programming in that way. So I kind of fooled myself, but it is a fun job regardless. Thanks very much for your comments, Tony. Afzal, I think you're going to get the last word.
Oh, sure. I think a lot of what I wanted to say was already covered by Sarah and James. it's more towards like the purpose and context. If the teams are given the right purpose and the right context, they naturally kind of embrace this agility in themselves. When you read the prompt, the first thing that came to mind was what Ken mentioned in Agile Software Development with Scrum, that book, right? If the natural ecosystem of software developers, right? You put a bunch of software developers in a room along with somebody who has a problem to solve. They would self-organize themselves and collaborate. Right? They will act as one team to solve that problem, and that's what kind of I experienced. Even though there were a lot of team boundaries, people, even though we formed a cross-functional team, people were still reporting to different managers. There were interpersonal issues, legacy code. Even with all those constraints, this team, after struggling a long while in solving a problem, they were told, Scrum is a tool you could try. So the how it came down to the team was, hey, let's go Agile. That's not how it went. Rather, we have a problem to solve, and we have some dates to meet, and Scrum is a tool you could use so that we can think small and then iteratively develop this. So I found that team succeed in a few months, even though that was for a short while. I don't know what happened after that, but that was a successful experience for me.
Thank you. Yeah, when it works, that when you put people together and they sort of work through it and they do self-organize, it's really magical. And I think that's sort of why Agile, where Agile came from, as people tried that, enough of them had really good experiences that they started sharing it, and then other people had good experiences. And then started running against some of the boundaries in terms of where that works, which again comes back to these other investments that we were talking about as well. I would love to spend more time on this, but we have hit our time box. This has been another great discussion. Thank you all so much for joining. Before you go, I want to let you know about next week's session and also the book giveaway. Once again, participate in the Discord and you'll be entered into the drawing for next week. Next week, I'm giving away a physical copy of the book now that it's out. So be sure to participate in that to enter. This week's winner is Dave M 2005. I don't know his real name, but I'll message him on the Discord and make sure he gets his copy. Next week's book club we have a special guest. Diana Larson is joining us. The topic is invest in change. And of course, Diana is very well suited to speak to that. So don't miss it. She is the author of Agile Retrospectives, many other books, my co-founder on the Agile Fluency Project, co-creator of the Agile Fluency Model with me. It's going to be a great session. Thanks very much, everybody. And I will see you all next time.